I begin to sing of Demeter, the holy goddess with the beautiful hair, and her daughter, too, the one with the delicate ankles, whom Hades seized. The youngest girl, however, displayed greater perseverance and firmness in their common misfortune. She bore her lot cheerfully, with a strength of mind much beyond her years. Not but what, at first, she was truly melancholy, alas. Who would not have felt such misfortunes? But after deploring her father's ruin, she could do better than resume her former gaiety, make up her mind to the position she was placed in, and forget a world which she and her family had found so ungrateful, and the friendship of which she was so fully persuaded was not to be relied upon in the time of adversity. Every intelligent person who saw her in her true light was eager to give her the preference over her sisters. In the midst of her greatest splendor, although distinguished by her merit, she was so handsome that she was called the Beauty. Welcome to A Niche Retelling, the podcast where we explore all the ways old tales are made new. I am your host, Jasmine Garcia, and joining me today is our very special guest, Paige LaVoie, the author of Our Own Little Underworld, and I'm in Love with Mothman. How are you doing today, Paige?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. For the sake of our listeners, is there anything you would like to just kind of tell about yourself?
So like the general tagline website-y thing is, hi, I'm Paige LaVoie. I love Halloween. And yeah, I write stories about monsters, misfits, and falling in love. And I generally keep it kind of cozy. I do happen to do quite a bit of retellings, which is it's not always intentional. And we're definitely going to talk about that. I'm excited.
Ooh, I'm very excited to hear more about that. Our main focus is Our Own Little Underworld, which is a retelling of the Hades and Persephone story. What is your relationship with the story of Hades and Persephone in general?
You know, it's one of those things that I feel like I've been very drawn to, particularly through artwork over the years. I think even before I was familiar with the myth, on like the days of me being a teenager going on DeviantArt and stuff like that, you would see this very mysterious looking dark haired man and like a flowery looking woman, and I'm like, what is up with these two? What's going on here? So I feel like there was just like something already working in my brain, and then I became more familiar with them, and that, you know, is a combination of things through pop culture, through things like Lore Olympus is so popular. But one of the biggest sort of things that restarted my interest was there's a YouTuber, Dale Kingsmill. She makes the coolest mythology videos, and she had, I think, two in particular on Hades and Persephone, and I absolutely loved them. I remember there was one version of the story where Persephone wanted to stay, and I can't remember if that was on her channel or the Wikipedia rabbit hole I went on after watching this one particular YouTube video, and it just kind of stayed in my subconscious for a while, where I was kind of background thinking about them until I got this idea.
Editor Jasmine here. So I did look into finding this YouTube channel. I was able to find it. It's under Monarch's Factory. And indeed, she does do a whole lot of different, not just mythology retellings, but fairy tale retellings. She gives tips for people who want to do homebrew D&Ds. It seems like a great channel. She's definitely gotten my subscription. Wonder if I can get her on the podcast someday. That could be interesting. I do believe she only ever did one retelling of Hades and Persephone, though, and that was 8 years ago, so you will have to do some digging if you want to find it, so that's why I will be putting that video in the show notes. Oh, that is very cool. You know, I keep on trying to remember what my first encounter with this story was, because obviously we had a Greek mythology unit at school that I absolutely devoured, but I don't know if Hades and Persephone actually came up. But much like you, I just kind of ended up absorbing it through cultural osmosis and the internet, because these two are so very popular, especially in our circles of the internet, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Always, like, it's the dark and the light combination. There's just something about it. So much so that I have so many outfits that have flowers and skulls.
And also, I don't know if you were also a 90s kid, but there was that claymation of the two of them. You can find it on YouTube. I think it's a claymation at least, but it's just a very pretty Hades and Persephone retelling. That's sort of that. I don't think it was through Disney. I don't know that that would be a thing. Yeah, but I know Disney has a cartoon too. That's like one of their little animated shorts. But I feel like it's probably something that we were consuming before we even realized realized it.
That is very possible. But yeah, there was a short early on in their whole thing. I would love to talk more about it, but with the strike, we are trying to be careful with that.
Oh, yeah, that's...
Yep. Yeah,
what did I even... Who? Giant company that we're not talking about? Ugh.
Yeah, it's definitely not difficult or anything. Animated Tales of the World, was that it?
I think it was, yeah.
Editor Jasmine here. I am keeping this exchange in, even though, no joke, we found out the strike was ending within hours of recording this. I am keeping this as a little time capsule so I can continue to be smug that it's finally fucking over. But yes, it did turn out the claymation part was from Animated Tales from Around the World, and the Disney short she was referring to was The Goddess of the Spring. I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds fascinating. And I'll have to find out if that struck work too.
Yeah, feel free to edit all that out.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned how this idea was just kind of growing in your brain all through the years of just kind of getting into them. So what made you finally decide to write a modernized adaptation of it?
It's that cliche writer answer where I was doing something completely different and all of a sudden I grabbed, God, it was either a random note card, like a Post-it, or it was a napkin. I honestly can't remember, but it was one of those, whatever I could find. And I wrote a rough version of the back cover blurb just out of nowhere. I thought, he's the son of the local mortician. She's the daughter of a midwife, and they're going to run away from home together. And that's all I really knew. And that was what started it. And it sort of stayed pinned up on my idea wall for a little bit before I got into writing them. And I would jot down tiny things. But once I started writing their story, it was, God, probably one of the fastest things I've ever written. It was over the course of a couple of months and it was done. It really sunk its claws into me. And it was such a really fun journey to be on with these characters.
I very much adore these two. They're just so sweet together, and they go through so much in the midst of the story, which does definitely make sense. Could you explain a bit about how you decided how their story was going to go, pretty much? Like your process of when it came to adapting it, why did you decide to make it modernized?
So I always knew it was going to be modernized. My vision for them was always these teenagers in high school. The thing that was always a question for me is how far I was going to lean into Hades and Persephone. Was this going to be just a connection that I was making? Was this ever going to be a part of the story that I told anyone else? Or would this just be like a little thing that I knew was inspiring it and fueling it? And everything sort of came really naturally, where when she wakes up in the funeral home and he has like stowed her away in a coffin to keep her warm after finding her in the snow, he needs to make her tea and it's pomegranate. And I just thought that that was such a fun little way of getting it going. She's waking up essentially in this very like underworld death setting with this cozy cup of pomegranate tea, like welcoming into this next chapter of her life with him. And I liked, that was another thing I debated on, how familiar are these two average teenagers? Well, not average, they're pretty great, but these two teenagers, how familiar are they with the Greek mythology? Would they pick up on any of these funny things that are going on? And that was something that was really fun to decide too, that Hayden would absolutely be a Hades and Persephone fan. I think that would no doubt be one of his like favorite stories to base his artwork on. And Percy wouldn't be allowed to consume any of that because her mom wouldn't allow that.
Yeah, no, I have to say, reading the parts with Percy and her mother were actually quite difficult for me because fortunately, thank God, I've never been in a situation like that, but someone I love very much has, and you definitely portrayed it in the exact amount of infuriating and heartbreaking that it needed to be. Editor Jasmine here. I really wish I had thought of this during the conversation. But while I am not in a romantic relationship with this person at all, I really do relate to Hayden in this situation where you're seeing someone you care about go through this and not even realize how bad it is. I'm trying desperately to set them free of that. It hits hard, guys. You definitely should read the book.
Yeah, it's hard because Percy's mom is a very toxic, very emotionally, and then in that one instance, physically abusive. And then we kind of have hints of, is that the first time that's happened? Kept that off page because I just wanted to make sure that with how dark and serious those topics are, I was still moving the characters forward as well. But we do see that like PTSD in Percy of like when Hayden gets really excited while he's telling a a story or like uses a swear word or whatever, she'll kind of clam up, and he notices and is like very receptive to making sure that she's always comfortable, which I think was really important too, that these characters had this mutual respect and understanding for the hardships that they're both going through in different ways, but in ways that also intersect a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very moved by that because I am definitely a fan of when two very broken characters just kind of find each other and kind of fill in the cracks there. And I will say, speaking of Percy's mother, obviously a popular interpretation that has come up in more recent years of Hades and Persephone's story is that Demeter is actually a controlling parent, that it's not just this borderline evil god dragging her precious baby into the underworld. She's stifling her because Persephone didn't, in a lot of versions, didn't even have that name. She was just Kore, which just means girl. And so this portrayal of her as a controlling parent that's gotten in the way of her daughter's happiness, which again is very much reflected in this version. Why do you think that's an idea so many fans of this myth have latched onto, and what made you decide that that was the direction you were going to go?
I think for me it made sense because for teens in particular, and that's the main audience this story is for, I think most of them can relate to having either a friend, like you said, who has this really controlling, overbearing parent, or dealing with it themselves. And I really wanted this to be something that would speak to teenagers directly, of like, you can get away from a situation like that. This isn't going to be forever. You can find happiness. I think if you are romanticizing this story in particular, you know, where you want them to end up together, she wants to be in the underworld, they're falling in love, having Persephone's mother be like a villain archetype of some sort does make that easier, I think, and adds to that fairy tale princess aspect of this story where, you know, like we have sort of like that Rapunzel energy is something that I've heard a lot of people being like, oh, this is like Rapunzel meets a Hades and Persephone. Like she has very much like bubbly Disney princess, like someone's got to rescue her from her tower, or, you know, she's got to, I think they very much rescue each other. But I think that it kind of leans into more of a fairy tale direction when you have that sort of evil stepmother or evil actual mother in this. Well, not that a stepmother isn't an actual mother, but you know what I mean, like the archetype that the
I mean, interestingly, while yes, obviously stepmothers can be just as nurturing and just as important to someone's life as a mother if that is the relationship they have, there is something especially visceral about this was the person who birthed you and
yes,
what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that that is something that, like, you know, be explored more too, because it's so complicated for Percy. She knows her mom loves her in some way that is so unhealthy, and she loves her too. They've had this history, all these good moments, this whole lifetime together, and she's so horrible to her. And she's really starting to see that and make those connections and realize she deserves better. And I think, you know, Mrs. Adams, Hayden's mom, really becomes a mother figure to her too. Oh, I love her so much. She's my little, like, if I could just have that energy, I would have done well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we all wish we could grow to be that cool. That is one thing I really did enjoy about this story, is that while you definitely do not hesitate to call Mrs. Bloom out on her behavior, which is indeed very toxic and damaging, you don't necessarily make her out to be a monster either. Like, you see that, no, she does love her, and if there's one thing that has always bugged me, it's this idea that just because someone is abusive, it means they are incapable of love. That is not how that works, and I think that makes people much more likely to stay in bad relationships. They do believe the person loves them.
Yeah.
Love is not inherently good. It can be toxic, unfortunately.
And it can be like in their case, a big tool for that manipulation too, of like, well, you care about me, don't you? And all of that. And oh, Percy,
You're all I have, that kind of thing. It's just like, oof. And the sad part is very true, and it is most likely, at least partially, because of her behavior.
Yeah. And it's that, you know, Percy has to decide that that's not her responsibility or her fault. Like, she's got to be able to make her own decisions and move on. And I think we see that a lot in different Hades and Persephone retellings of like, this is my time to make my own space. And that might honestly be one of the reasons it's so popular to go in this direction, because like coming of age story or even an adult finding their space in the world, that is always going to be something that you're going to root for and want to see.
And I think especially for like women and femme presenting people, there's just like this certain expectation that we have to be a certain way, like pretty much more of how the culture kind of sees Persephone, even though one of the things about her is that she is both. She is both the sunlight and the flowers, but she is also the queen of the dead, pretty much. And like, I do feel like we gotta hide our darkness and just be always happy and bubbly. So being given the space to kind of give in to the darkness, yeah, it makes sense that kind of speaks to us, I feel like.
Yeah.
I will say, we do, of course, mostly see this through Percy's point of view. We don't really see what goes on inside Mrs. Bloom's head. So, since we are on the subject of how you did actually make her out to be as horrible as she is indeed a human being. Are there any insights into her character that perhaps a reader might have missed that you feel like we should know?
You know, I didn't have any big influences, I guess. Like, writing her, I had some really great beta reader feedback where it was like, hey, I want to see some moments in the beginning where she's not being completely terrible. Can we get like just those little hints of that human nature, that relationship? And so I think like moments where they're like singing in the car together or having kind of pleasant conversation. She brings up snacks to totally eavesdrop and like check in, but having those like standard mom moments for her were also very important just for that balance. But for particular influences or like lore tying in, I don't really have any big things. You know, I did grow up in like that sort of homeschool conservative community, which so this is kind of an archetype. I intentionally did not base it on anyone that I knew because I felt like that would just not be respectful or anything like that. But Percy having that background herself, I feel like felt really natural of just the way that she's been sheltered in particular, the way that they're having a conversation about sneaking out to prom and they have the music up loud so you can't hear what they're talking about and things like that all felt like very like, if you know, you know, but also I wanted it to be really natural to just like the teenage experience.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, even teenagers with good families get that rebellious streak, of course. That's like the whole point. You know, one of the things that we do know about Mrs. Bloom's backstory is, of course, the death of her mother and Percy's grandmother. She is dead by the beginning of the story, but she really is kind of a constant presence. Can you talk a little bit about what made you decide to make her part of this story, given as far as I can tell, Persephone never knew her grandmother Rhea. I'm pretty sure all of them had been defeated by then.
You know, I think that was just kind of a personal character choice when I was thinking about the family dynamic, too. I thought who in Percy's life would have been there supporting her, and what was kind of that moment when things started getting worse with her mother, and that would have been the moment where her grandmother was no longer there to like mediate and be that cheerleader or supporter for Percy. I think that Percy kind of like has her grandma up on a pedestal. It's really interesting because I almost want to go back and sort of as an exercise write a scene of the two of them together before she passed and just see what I feel like that energy would be. But I think she's just like a sweet grandma who is keeping up with that like sheltered, keeping up with the appearances and like also trying to make sure that family and the home is having that positive energy. And as soon as she's gone, that's gone too.
So basically pretty much everything Mrs. Bloom used against her regarding her.
I think that was really important to me too, that Mrs. Bloom, and I think she says something like, oh, you know, like how her grandma didn't really care or she would have hated this and all of that sort of thing. I don't think any of that was true. I think her grandma was always her biggest supporter and was always kind of harping on the mom of like, oh, let her do this, let her go on the trip or let her do whatever it is. Or I guess she wouldn't have been in school at that point, church trip, whatever it was. And I think when she's gone, then it's kind of like you have no one helping you sneak out of the castle as the princess in the tower. You're just kind of stuck there and you realize that this is not a healthy dynamic.
Yeah, no, there's no buffer there.
Yeah.
Not to give Mrs. Bloom any more slack than she deserves, of course, but grief can absolutely bring out the worst in you.
That's true too. And it also was, I mean, as a plot device, it was a great way to get her to the cemetery. So
Yeah, no, like, I love how that's how they first meet. That just felt so fitting.
Thank you. I really like that scene. I also really like that we start in Hayden's head and we just see how bumbly and sweet he is.
Oh my gosh, Hayden is such a cinnamon roll, and I am a sucker for goth characters who are absolute cinnamon roll.
Punk rock cinnamon roll. I'm very much, I was such a Hayden. And I had like, you know, a little mohawk when I was 19. I would like walk around the cemetery and I would take my sketchbook book. And yeah, and people would think I was so scary, but I was definitely just a very shy teen who looked scary.
Yeah, no, it's like armor, you know? I was too busy being a theater kid, but...
My sister was the theater kid, so I was like the scary goth who hung out with the theater kids.
Oh, I love that. Is there anything else in particular you want to discuss regarding this story? I mean, I love how there's like imagery of every single season in this story.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Thank you. I knew that it was wintertime when it started, and then I thought that them going on the road trip and kind of seeing the seasons melt, that was their kind of a representation of that time, like shortening that they had together. I really enjoyed kind of figuring out what their safe haven, their underworld, as Hayden calls it, would be, and having like them hang out in that little cabin. I just love when characters run off to the woods together and fall in love, I guess. And I just had so much fun figuring out like the symbolism of life and death, like having her come from even their last names, Bloom, which flowers and florals, and then Adams was such a fun choice. Like that was actually a placeholder name, but I'm like, I want him to be a little Adams Family kid. Like, why not?
No, there's so much Adams Family vibes there.
Yeah, but and also, you know, having her walk into this house where she would have definitely been brought up to think that this is scary and bad, and like Percy Bloom was probably not allowed to celebrate Halloween, let's be real, and walking into this like haunted mansion looking, you know, spooky house, and looking at it and feeling like warmth and comfort in the first time, and she doesn't even remember. So I had so much fun with them. It was really vulnerable. Like I think there were scenes that I really felt like I was ripping my heart out and really tapped into like that teenage angst that we all feel, and some of it was just really difficult to write, but it was also just such a joy to like dive into their story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it was really heart-wrenching, a lot of what they go through just for the sake of Percy finding some semblance of freedom.
And like I feel like we've talked a ton about Percy, but also Hayden standing up to his bullies and stuff. Like that was a big thing of that theme of him not wanting, he's almost worried about just defending himself because he doesn't want to turn into like the person he knows his father was. And his journey of realizing he can stand up for himself and he can show strength that isn't necessarily violent, but just kind of straighten up and not be afraid to kind of say, you know what, enough is enough with these bullies. Also that sometimes walking away from a situation isn't giving up. He was so determined to just stick around at school because he didn't want the bullies to win. But really him pulling out and deciding to do virtual schooling and then dual enroll in college, that was the best thing for him. And that the thing that helped him like thrive and grow as a character. And it was what he was holding back on because he didn't want to stop showing his face. He thought that was giving up. But sometimes winning a situation or standing up in a situation just looks different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, the fact that he is actually not nearly as scary or awful as people perceive him to be, that very much fits into a lot of interpretations of Hades, given how many people are like, yeah, he doesn't want to be down there. He was basically just sent there because his brothers are assholes.
He doesn't even want to be there.
Yeah, and you know what? He is the most faithful of his brothers, so there's that.
Yeah, I definitely wanted him to be like that, like almost like insta-love. Like he sees her and he's like, yep, that's it forever. I'm obsessed.
The instant connection that they have with each other, even though they hardly have spoken, it's just, I know a lot of people don't buy into that, but I absolutely do. I think there are just some people where you look at them, it's just like, it's gonna be you.
That's a trope. I always have to make sure that I have that connection and that chemistry straight away if I'm going for it, because I'm such an insta-love believer, because I met my husband when I was like, gosh, I think 19, which is wild. Yeah, he was honestly my first like serious boyfriend. And now, gosh, we've been married for 12 years. Yeah. I mean, he's the best. I think just also meeting him so early, a lot of our energy as a couple of like goth indie, cute indie musician boy and like goth art kid really went into this. It's not autobiographical, but it does have those like feelings, those really real feelings of being young and falling just so hard in love.
That's really sweet.
Thanks.
And it definitely shows in the story. There's something very genuine about it, and with that added context, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we have a very funny meet cute. I won't talk too long about it, but we were in an overcrowded coffee house and a friend was like, "Oh, you can sit here," and pointed to his crumbling duct taped together guitar case. And he came over and he asked me very politely if I could move. And I had been checking him out at this point for I think 2 months. And I'm like, oh my God, he's coming over. He's finally talking to me.
Oh my gosh, that's adorable. This is stuff the coffee shop AUs are made on.
I know. Yeah, it really happens. Sometimes it really happens. I wrote How I Met My Other, which is a collection of short stories they're written as fiction, but they're people's actual true love stories. So I dive into all the feels in that.
Oh, I'll definitely have to look into that. That sounds like right up my alley. Editor Jasmine here, because I do realize that this question is probably going to raise the ire of, shall we say, the more academically inclined Greek mythology nerds. Yes, I'm aware that it's debatable whether or not Cerberus means spot. I just thought it was a cute little joke. Don't get me wrong, I try to be intellectual on this podcast, but I'm also here to make jokes. So if you were going to try to correct me, please do not bother pointing it out. I'm aware. I just thought it would be a fun thing to ask. Live a little. How are you supposed to be upset about hearing about a dog named Spot, especially with 3 heads to scratch? Come on. And you know what? I am going to add one more kind of cutesy question.
Oh, sure.
Are they ever going to get a dog named Spot?
I think they should. I have thought about writing some sort of something that's their wedding or leading up to their wedding. And do they have a dog? Where do they get married? Is it in the cemetery? What kind of dress does she wear? I kind of picture her in something that's really quirky, the strawberry dress that everyone was obsessing over from TikTok, just something really colorful and fun. And I think that if ever I can summon the energy, whenever there's ever a break between projects, I'd love to just do a little vignette of their wedding, maybe put it up on the mailing list.
That would be very cool. I've always said that if I ever actually finish projects, what I'm definitely going to do is a series of short stories from the different stories that I've written about celebrating the holidays or something like that.
Oh my God. Yeah. I have half of a Mothman Christmas that would happen between the first and second books that I have just been thinking about, just kind of fiddling with every time I get the time and energy.
Oh, that'd be so fun. And what a perfect transition point, because it does seem like there is an overlap between fans of Beauty and the Beast and fans of Hades and Persephone, which is especially interesting since the original fairy tale took so much from entirely different Greek mythology couple, Eros and Psyche. Do you have any thoughts on that phenomenon?
I don't. That's so interesting. I wish I could speak to that more, because I think that we all just kind of like stories repeated and they all kind of end up jumbling together. So it doesn't surprise me that it all kind of mishmashed. I also think that Hades and Persephone and Beauty and the Beast fans, you like the spooky big guy and the cute flowery character too, I think that there's a mashup there of aesthetics. You replace the pomegranate with a rose and I think there's something there.
There definitely is. You could see them having a very cute double date.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of Beauty and the Beast, I definitely noticed, we're going to go into Mothman now. I definitely noticed some elements similar to several versions of the story, but even down to the involvement of the Fae, in the original fairy tale. Was this intentional, or is it just simply par for the course with the monster lover genre?
Once again, just started writing the thing, and it took me, I think, mid-draft until I went, oh, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I think what took it over the edge is we have our sort of monster hunter character. And the important thing with designing Chris is that he thinks he's the romantic hero. And I wanted his dialogue in particular, within the context of a different story, to be really swoony, really bantery. There's a scene towards the end where he is fixing her roof. And I think that scene gives such hallmark banter of he's I'm fixing your roof. And she's no. And he's I didn't ask. I got my toolbox and come on up. And all right, we're going to order pizza now. Thanks for having me over. And she's I literally didn't. Please get out of my house. But if she liked him, I think that it would really lend itself to that sort of roguish, assertive character that you see a lot in romance books. And in the right context, I'm a fan of that kind of character too. And that's truly who he thinks he is, with his like monster hunting through the woods and like all of this bravado. And as soon as I made that connection with him, I'm like, oh, I want to lean into this a little bit more. So I wanted to do a scene where they're in the tavern and he's announcing that he's captured the monster and everyone's kind of cheersing him and he's celebrating. I'm like, okay, how can we like deviate? Also, we want to make sure it's interesting and different enough. And that was a really fun scene to write, of her sneaking out of a bar to go save her monster boyfriend from the back of a truck. And yeah, like that also leads into their first sort of big disagreement, which was very fun.
Yeah, that was oof. I found myself going like, honey, no,
honey, no.
Stop it.
Yeah. And so I don't know that, I think there's a lot about Heather in particular that I don't think that she gives like typical beauty. Not that she isn't, I'm not saying beauty in the word of beautiful. I'm saying it as like the main character of Beauty and the Beast. I don't think she really gives that energy, so to speak, except for like that role that she's fallen into, where we know that she likes reading books, but she's not really like a big bookworm. Like, so there are tropes that she's not exactly falling into, but that idea of going into the woods and she chooses to have that escapism and oops, there's a giant monster there. I gotta nurse him back to health was just so much fun. It was such a delight.
No, it really was. This book ended up being so much more delightful than I expected.
Thank you.
And it is fascinating when you mention with the Monster Hunter character, because the whole idea of Beauty and the Beast being a love triangle is actually an invention of the Cocteau film, actually. He pretty much invented the idea of it being a love triangle, and it just got into every single retelling ever since, pretty much.
Interesting. That's so interesting.
Yeah, the whole who is the monster, who is the man. And
I think also just like going back to like, was this intended to be a retelling? It really, again, just kind of fell into place, like all of those big pieces. But my biggest influences with it were Hallmark romances and just the classic rom-com formats. So while I was writing this, I was also reading rom-coms. I really love the Well Met. Goodness, I'm forgetting what the series is called, but they're the...
Oh, but I know what you're talking about. I've been meaning to read that.
Oh, it's so cute. All of the books are really adorable. Allie Hazelwood's books, I love her stuff. So a lot of those popular rom-coms, and then also Hallmark movies. I was having those on and kind of studying the pacing of them because they're honestly like paced so well. And so I was like, okay, I want to pace this book exactly like that. I wasn't sure if it was going to be spicy. I'd never written anything adult before this. And all I knew was I wanted it to feel really sweet and I wanted it to have like an autumn feeling. A Hallmarky kind of book for people who love Halloween was the goal.
It was successful. That is
Yay!
a good way of putting it. Like, I'm very picky about the Hallmarky kind of stuff, but when it hits right, it hits right. This definitely hit right. I adored your portrayal of Moth, especially because, like, yeah, obviously he's kind of the dark, scary monster, but he's also just kind of this little snarky in a playful way kind of guy.
Oh my god. I really, really wanted to make sure his banter never felt too mean. You know, like in the beginning, I wanted him to be more snarky, but I wanted to make sure that he was just like a big, goofy cinnamon roll. We love cinnamon rolls. Love a goth cinnamon roll. And I really liked just that balance of protectiveness, the scene in the diner where he has like his arm around her and all of that kind of tension building. But with the Fae question, that was something I really went back and forth of like, okay, what is he going to be? Because there's a lot of mixed opinions, right, on Mothman. He's an actual cryptid from West Virginia. And I'm like, okay, I really need to just put it out of my head of like, are the Mothman fans going to be angry with how I interpret it? Or I had some anxiety. And I was like, I just want to write what feels right for him in this particular canon universe that I'm creating. I mean, it doesn't have to be the canon that he can't be, right? Because he's whatever you kind of want and believe.
He's folklore. You could do whatever you want with folklore.
Yeah, folklore, exactly. So in my universe, exactly. I'm like, okay, in my universe, we're going to figure out what feels true to me. And it doesn't have to be what feels true to anyone else, but we'll kind of see what happens. And I really went back and forth on if he was going to be like a forest guardian, like the last of his kind forest guardian, and there was like always magic here, like that kind of story, or if something else was going on. And I ended up, I think, just like naturally arriving at the conclusion conviction that he was some sort of fae. It felt right for his mannerisms, for his dialogue, like that he had come from somewhere, that he had a regalness about something that I don't think he would have had if he's just been wandering through the forest this whole time. So because of his speech, mannerisms, and everything else, I think he might be some sort of fae creature. And you get to find out so much more about that in the next book. I'm very excited.
Very excited to hear about that. And you know who he really reminded me of as I was reading it? This might just be because that was one thing I was hyperfixating on a lot at the time. He very much came off as a less douchey version of Dream of the Endless.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Man, you've never read Sandman?
Oh, okay. So this is like I feel like my failing as just like a former goth kid not reading this Sandman. But I'm now that you've said Sandman, I'm like familiar in the pop culture sense, and like I know that there was a adaptation recently too, but I haven't consumed any of it, which is I feel like a disservice to myself. So
it's fascinating because I feel like he really, like, a lot of how you portrayed him, especially in his human form, is just like, this is giving so much Morpheus, and
I gotta consume that now. I gotta get some comic books.
Yeah, they're the comics. There's a really good audio drama with James McAvoy as Morpheus.
Ooh. Oh, nice. Okay. That sounds fun. I'm just now starting to try to be an audiobook person. And I zone out. And I think an audio drama makes it a little easier for me because there's like, sound effects sometimes, differences in voices. Like it feels like I'm listening to an old timey radio show. It's fun.
Pretty much, yeah. Like, what's that joke? Video killed the radio star and podcasts and audiobooks are having their revenge or something?
I love that.
But I'm actually so excited for you to experience a story for the first time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts when you do.
Yeah. I thought a lot about Howl from Howl's Moving Castle, and also like Mr. Darcy.
Oh, of course, Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is kind of the blueprint, isn't he?
He really is. We can't get away from it, and why would we want to? Instead of the hand flex, it's the claw flex.
Oh my god, I can picture it so perfectly.
Yeah.
Thank God, he is so much nicer to her. Darcy was to Lizzie at first, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's, can't have that much meanness in such a tightly paced book.
You get to it, and while I love an enemies to lovers every once in a while, I'm glad that's not where we went with this.
Yeah, their first meeting was different originally too. Was he just fell on her house? We never had that first chase scene, and I can't remember why I decided to put that in, but
we built some good tension.
Yeah, and I'm like, you know what? She falls out of a tree. That's how it... No, that isn't what happened first. Oh my God. He saved her from a pack of wolves, and I thought, that's a little too much, Paige. That's a little... You gotta pull it back.
That's what adds to the Beauty and the Beast of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I went, no, I don't think this... Sometimes you write a scene, and you can feel it while you're writing it, where you're like, this is a lie. This isn't how this happened. This is a lie. And it makes editing a lot easier, but it also can be frustrating because you're like, can't this part just be how it is? And you're like, nope, it's not. So falls out of a tree instead, which I think is way more fun.
Yeah, poor Heather is just kind of like, oh, sweetie, like, yes, I understand why you're doing this, but it might be a bit in over your head there, dear.
Yeah, that's the most self-insert I got, I think, where I couldn't climb a tree. Me? I also don't own any practical shoes, really. No, I don't own any cute practical shoes. I have a pair of Croc flats, as nice as they sound, but they're very comfortable. But yeah, if I was trying to be cute in the woods, those probably wouldn't be great either. I think I would slip. Yeah,
I can see that.
Need something grippy.
Oh, I did forget one question regarding our own little one, Underworld, I realized.
Mm-hmm.
Was that reveal about Percy's father a call out against Zeus?
It wasn't, but I fully support that. I wish I had done that. Like, I feel like it should have been. Yeah, so I would like to just claim it and say, absolutely, that was so intentional, 100%. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but in every single one of my books, now that you've read these two, they end up at a diner at some point in time.
That's true. Who doesn't love a good diner?
Yeah, my dream is to get artwork commissioned eventually of just all of my characters sitting together in a diner. That's like the goal.
Oh my god, that'd be so cute.
Yeah, for Mothman, I was like, I don't think they're going to end up at a diner. How will this happen? And then it did, and I just, have to shoehorn it in wherever I can.
It's a small town. Of course it has a diner.
Yeah, it's got a diner. Would it have a gluten-free menu? Probably not, but we got to live some sort of fantasy. That's the biggest fantasy element of the first book. The second one goes way more more fantasy. But the first one, wow, a gluten-free menu in rural Ohio.
Yeah, that's the real dream.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that the story of Hades Persephone and Beauty and the Beast endure?
I think as we've been talking, it seems like there are just these universal themes that I think are never going to go away. Like finding where you belong. Beauty and the Beast in particular. I mean, who doesn't getting captured by a monster and living in a beautiful castle? We love that.
And I feel like we as a culture are kind of accepting that about ourselves now.
We have to now. Yeah, like truly with the boom of monster romance currently. But no, I think there's just something very human in these stories. And when you strip them back with Hades and Persephone in sort of this high school way, or if you kind of take the elements of Beauty and the Beast, which really are these two lonely people finding each other and falling in love, that I think is such a universal thing. And I think love stories are always going to get kind of repackaged and reimagined and go on for as long as we exist in this world, because that's just something that is so true and honest, and that we're all in some way, shape, or form, I think, looking for. Oh, thanks.
I do love that. And yeah, I think that does kind of touch on to why there is such an overlap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as, again, the people who are fans of Hades and Persephone have kind of reclaimed it as, no, this isn't like a kidnapping story. This is a story of a girl that's been sheltered and is trying to embrace her inner dark side. And,
yeah.
Oh, look at that. I get to rule the underworld? Hell yeah.
Say a swear word for the first time at a gas station? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking about these stories with us. Out of curiosity, so what other retellings would you like to kind of plug, since we didn't really get into those?
Oh my gosh, mine or other people's? Because I wish I was prepared.
Either way.
Oh my gosh, not a retelling, but I have to talk about one of my very best friends, Taylor Simon. She's such a talented author. She, in May, will be coming out with a YA story. It's a space fantasy called An Infinite Pull, not pool, but Pull. It has Treasure Planet meets Little Mermaid energy. I think she would be such a fun person to talk to, particularly on this podcast, to break down all of the themes, all of the little Easter eggs, all of the moments. It's delightful. It's such a good story. And that's going to come out this May. As for retellings from me, goodness, I think it's just, I have the Beauty and the Beast one. I have our own little Underworld. I do have a Frankenstein retelling that's shelved currently. We'll see whatever comes of it in the next few years. But the second I'm in Love with Mothman, I have been told has, oh, actually, no, it will be the third one, but the series as it continues in general, someone said it kind of has like a Thumbelina vibe. Get ready to explore the Fae realm and all the different elements there.
Yay! I did see that is coming out in just 5 days, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It'll recording anyway. I think it will.
Yes.
It'll be out the next day by the time this podcast
out. Oh, okay, wonderful. Oh, then while I'm here, I'm also going to just let you know real quick, we're celebrating the release of I'm Engaged to Mothman at the Ripped Bodice in Brooklyn, November 17th, and tickets are available on their website or at my link trees on all my social medias and stuff. So if you are in the New York area and you want to come say hi and talk about retellings and all the fun stuff, definitely come find me. Great.
Yes, I was actually talking to a friend of the show, Regina, about it. She was like, wait, are you gonna be in Brooklyn? It's like, no, I'm just excited about the book.
I wish. Oh, that would be amazing.
That would be amazing. Any final thoughts?
Just that this was lovely. I feel like I was a little rambly, and I appreciate just the flow of the conversation, and I had such a fun time chatting with you. It was great.
Thank you, and you are welcome to come anytime you like, for the record.
Hooray! I would love to.
But come, you goddesses who have charge of the demos of Eleusis, fragrant with incense, and of Paros the island and rocky Antron. Come, O lady resplendent with gifts, Queen Deo, bringer of Horai, both you and your daughter, the most beautiful Persephone. Think kindly and grant, in return for this song, a rich means of livelihood that suits the Thumos, and I will keep you in mind throughout the rest of my song. The queen and the fairy, her sister, were equally attentive to beauty, her husband, the queen, his mother, the old man, and all his family, so that there never was known people who lived so long. The queen, mother of the prince, caused this marvelous history to be recorded in the archives of her kingdom and in those of the Happy Island, that it might be handed down to posterity. They also decimated copies of it throughout the universe, so that the world at large might never cease to talk of the wonderful adventures of Beauty and the Beast.